Chapter 6, in which Thingamy and Bob, bringing a mysterious suitcase and followed by the Groke, come into the story, and in which the Snork leads a court case. Early one morning at the beginning of August, Thingamy and Bob came walking over the mountain and stopped just where Sniff had found the hobgoblin's hat. Thingamy wore a red cap and Bob carried an enormous suitcase. They had come a very long way and were rather tired, so they rested for a bit and looked down over Moomin Valley, where the smoke from the Moomin house was rising between the silver poplars and plum trees. "Smoke," said Thingamy. "Folk means smood," said Bob, nodding, and they began to wander down to the valley, talking in the strange way that Thingamys and Bobs do talk. It isn't clear to everyone, but the main thing is that they understand each other. Very cautiously they tiptoed up to the house and stood shyly by the front steps. "Do you think we could go in?" asked Thingamy. "It depends," said Bob. "Don't be frightened if they're gross and grumpy." "Shall we dock on the knaw?" suggested Thingamy. "But imagine if somebody comes out and screams." Just then Moomin Mamma stuck her head out of the window and shouted, "Coffee?" Thingamy and Bob were so dreadfully frightened that they jumped into the opening of the potato cellar. "Oh," said Moomin Mamma with a start, "I believe those were mice disappearing into the cellar. Sniff, run down with a little milk for them." Then she caught sight of the suitcase which stood by the steps. "Luggage too," thought Moomin Mamma. "Dear me, then they've come to stay." And she went off to look for Moomin Papa to ask him to put up 2 more beds, very, very small ones. Meanwhile, Thingamy and Bob had dug themselves into the potatoes so that only their eyes could be seen, and there they waited in terror for what might happen to them. "Anyway, I can fell smood," muttered Thingamy. "Somebody's coming," whispered Bob. "Sot a nound." The cellar door creaked, and at the top of the steps stood Sniff with a lantern in one paw and a saucer of milk in the other. "Hi, where are you?" he shouted. Thingamy and Bob crept still farther down and held on to each other tight. "Will you have some milk?" said Sniff. "Don't make any totis," whispered Bob. "If you think I'm going to stand here half the day," said Sniff angrily, "you're mistaken. I suppose you don't know any better. Silly old mice who haven't the sense to come in by the front door." "Milly old souse yourself," retorted Thingamy and Bob, who were seriously upset by this. "Oh, so you're not from round here," thought Sniff. "I'd better fetch Moomin Mamma." And he locked the cellar door and ran into the kitchen. "Well, did they like the milk?" Moomin Mamma asked. "They talk a strange language," said Sniff. "Nobody can understand what they say." "What's it like?" asked Moomin Troll, who was shelling peas with the Hamoulin. "Milly old souse yourself," said Sniff. Moomin Mamma sighed. "This is going to be a nice mix-up," she said. "How shall I be able to find out what they want for pudding on their birthday, or how many pillows they like to have?" "We'll soon learn their language," said Moomin Troll. "It sounds easy." "I think I understand them," said the Hamoulin reflectively. "Didn't they tell Sniff it was a silly old mouse?" Sniff blushed and tossed his head. "Go and talk to them yourself if you're so clever," he said. So the Hamoulin lumbered away to the cellar, stepped down the steps and called out kindly, "Welcome to the Human Mouse." Thingamy and Bob stuck their heads out of the potato pile and looked at him. "Me some hilk," continued the Hamoulin. Then they scampered up the steps and into the drawing room. Sniff looked at them and noticed that they were much smaller than he was, so he felt kinder and said condescendingly, "Hello, nice to see you." "Thanks. Yame to sue," said Thingamy. "Did I fell smood?" inquired Bob. "What do they say now?" asked Moomin Mamma. "They're hungry," said the Hamoulin, "but they still don't seem to take to Sniff." "Give them my compliments then," said Sniff hotly, "and say that never in my life have I seen 2 such herring faces, and now I'm going out." "Piff is sneevish," said the Hamoulin. Nake no totis." "Anyway, come in and have some coffee," said Moomin Mamma nervously, and she showed Thingamy and Bob out onto the veranda. The Hamoulin, who was very proud of his new rank as interpreter, followed them. And that was how Thingamy and Bob came to live at the Moomin house. They didn't make much noise, spent most of the time hand in hand, and never lost sight of their suitcase. But towards dusk on the first day they began to get very worried. They ran frantically up and down stairs several times and eventually hid under the drawing-room carpet. "Mot's the watter?" asked the Hamoulin. "The Groke is coming," whispered Bob. "Groke? Who's that?" asked the Hamoulin, getting a bit frightened. "Tig and Brim and Gerrible," said Bob. "Lock the door against her." The Hamoulin ran to Moomin Mamma and told her the awful news. "They say that a big and grim and terrible Groke is coming down here. We must lock all the doors tonight. But I don't think any of the doors have keys, Except the cellar, said Moomin Mama in a worried voice. Dear me, and she went to talk to Moomin Papa about it. We must arm ourselves with more furniture in the front of the door, declared Moomin Papa. A large groat like that may be dangerous. I shall set an alarm clock in the drawing room, and Thingamy and Bob can sleep under the bed. But Thingamy and Bob had already crept into the bureau drawer and refused to come out. Moomin Papa shook his head and went to the woodshed for his blunderbuss. The evenings were already beginning to draw in, the glowworms were out with little torches, and the garden was filled with black velvet shadows. The wind moved drearily through the trees, and Moomin Papa felt an uncanny feeling creeping over him as he went down the path. Suppose this groat were hiding behind a bush. What did she look like, and above all, how big was she? When he came in again, he put the sofa in front of the door and said, We must leave the light on all night. You must all be on the alert, and Snufkin must sleep indoors. It was terribly exciting. Then he knocked on the bureau drawer and said, We shall protect you. But there was no answer, so he pulled out to see if Thingamy and Bob had already been kidnapped. However, they slept peacefully, and beside them lay their suitcase. Let's go to bed, said Moomin Papa, but arm yourselves, all of you. So with much noise and chatter, that is exactly what they did. The light was burning in the drawing room. Midnight struck, and then 1 o'clock. A little after 2, the muskrat woke and wanted to get out of bed. He staggered sleepily downstairs and stopped in amazement in front of the sofa which stood across the door. He wanted to go out, so there he tried to. The alarm clock rang. In a moment, the house was filled with screams, shots and the stamping of feet as everybody came rushing down the stairs. Where's the groat? Demanded Moomin Troll. Oh, it was only me, said the muskrat peevishly. I just wanted to look at the stars. I forgot all about your stupid groat. Then go outside at once, said Moomin Troll, but don't do it again. And he threw the door open. Then they saw the groat. Everybody saw her. She sat motionless on the sandy path at the bottom of the steps and stared at them with round, expressionless eyes. She was not particularly big and didn't look dangerous either, but you felt that she was terribly evil and would wait forever, and that was awful. Nobody plucked up enough courage to attack. She just sat there for a while and then slid away into the darkness. But where she had been sitting, the ground was frozen. The Snork shut the door and shook himself. Poor Thingamy and Bob, he said. Hamul, look and see if they're awake. They were. Has she gone? Asked Thingamy. Yes, you can peep in Sleece now, replied the Hamulin. Thingamy sighed a little and said, Thank you, goodness. And they pulled the suitcase with them as far into the drawer as possible and went to sleep again. Everybody went back to bed, apart from Moomin Troll and Snufkin, who stayed on alert to keep everybody safe. Next morning, the Hamulin went anxiously out to the kitchen and said, I've been talking to Thingamy and Bob. Well, what is it now? Asked Moomin Mama with a sigh. It's the suitcase the groat wants, explained the Hamulin. What a monster, burst out Moomin Mama, to steal their small possessions from them. Yes, I know, said the Hamulin, but there is something that makes the whole thing more complicated. It seems that it is not the groat's suitcase. It seems it's the contents only. Agreed Moomin Mama. That does make it more tricky. We'll talk to the Snork. He always arranges everything so well. It's a remarkable case, said the Snork. We must hold a meeting. Everybody will come to the lilac bushes at 3 o'clock to discuss the question. It was one of those lovely warm afternoons full of the scent of flowers and humming-bees, and the garden was brilliant with the deep colours of late summer. The muskrat's hammock was hung between 2 bushes, and on it was the notice which said, Prosecutor for the groat. So the court case took place. Thingamy and Bob sat opposite in the prisoner's dock. I wish to be their prosecutor, said Sniff, who had not forgotten they had called him a silly old mouse. In that case, I'll be the counsel for the defence, said the Hamulin. What about me? Said the Snork maiden. You can be the Moomin family's witness, said her brother, and Snufkin can make notes concerning the proceedings of the court. But you're to do it properly, Snufkin. Why doesn't the groat have a counsel for the defence? Asked Sniff. That isn't necessary, replied the Snork, because the groat is in the right. Everything clear now? All right, we'll begin. He banged 3 times on the box with a hammer. Man, you cake it out, asked Thingamy. Mott nutch, said Bob, blowing a cherry stone at the judge. You are not to speak until I say so, said the Snork. Yes or no, nothing more. Is the said suitcase yours or the groat's? Yes, said Thingamy. No, said Bob. Right down that they contradicted each other, screamed Sniff. The Snort banged on the box. Quiet, he cried. Now I'm asking for the last time. Whose suitcase is it? Ours, said Thingamy. Now they say it's theirs, moaned the Hamulin in despair, and this morning they said the opposite. Well, Thingamy leapt forward and whispered something to the Hamulin. They say, he declared, that it's only the contents of the suitcase that belongs to the Groke. I can well believe it, said Sniff. The Groke gets her contents back and the herring faces keep their old suitcase. That's not clear either, cried the Hamulin boldly. The question is not who is the owner of the contents, but who has the greatest right to the contents. The right thing in the right place. You saw the Groke, everybody. Now I ask you, did she look as if she had the right to the contents? That's true enough, said Sniff in surprise. Clever of you, Hamul, but on the other hand, think how lonely the Groke is because nobody likes her and she hates everybody. The contents is perhaps the only thing she has. Would you now take that away from her too, lonely and rejected in the night? Sniff became more and more affected and his voice trembled. Cheated out of her only possession by Thingamy and Bob. He blew his nose and couldn't go on. Moomin Mama, had an idea. She went into the house and she came out with the Hobgoblin's black hat. Suddenly, the Groke was there. Moomin Mama got the Hobgoblin's cat out of the house and she noticed how the Groke looked at it. She spoke. Groke, do you know what has grown out of this hat? Raspberry juice and fruit trees and the most beautiful little self-propelling clouds. It's the only Hobgoblin's hat in the world. Show, said the Groke scornfully. Then Moomin Mama laid a few cherries in the hat and everybody waited in dead silence. If only they didn't turn into something nasty, whispered Snufkin to the Hamulin, but they were in luck. When the Groke looked into the hat, a handful of red rubies lay there. There, said Moomin Mama happily, and think what would happen if you put a pumpkin in it. The Groke looked at the hat. Then she looked at Thingamy and Bob. Then she looked at the hat again. You could see that she was thinking with all her might. Then suddenly she snatched the hat and without a word slithered like an icy grey shadow into the forest. It was the last time she was seen in Moomin Valley, and the last they saw of the Hobgoblin's hat too. At once the colours became warmer again and the garden was filled with the sounds and scents of summer. Thank goodness we've got rid of that hat, said Moomin Mama. Now it's done something sensible for once. But the clouds were fun, said Sniff. And playing Tarzan in the jungle, added Moomin Troll sadly. Good riddance to Rad Bubbage, said Thingamy, taking the suitcase in one hand and Bob in the other. And together they walked off towards the Moomin house while the others stood looking after them. What do they say now? Asked Sniff. Well, good afternoon is near enough, said the Hamulin. And that's the end of chapter 6. We'll be going on to the final chapter where we'll find out what's in the suitcase. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.